So welcome today. We are going to hear about a new initiative that's been running for a little bit of time at West Hill United Church here in Toronto, but that's not even the name of it. So I'm going to throw it right to Dennis, who's one of the key leaders, who's really exploring something brand new.
Right, right. Yeah, the initiative is called Thirdspace Community Arts. And you're absolutely right. It did start out of a vision at West Hill. And the West Hill congregation had some changes going on and were kind of selling their building and had at that same time been interacting with some folks from the Scarborough arts community. And they heard a need for more, arts, performing arts space in the community, and uh, understanding that they wanted to make more space for artists, particularly artists of color and Indigenous artists. They thought, well, let's use our position and opportunity of privilege, to make space for others. Um, myself, and just backing up, I'm Dennis Augustine, and I've been a partner to this lovely lady over here, Galia, and I'm a former evangelical Pentecostal minister specifically. So I haven't been doing that for now it's, I was 29 when I left the ministry. It's a bit of the family business. My father was a minister. My mother is a minister. My sister went to the same seminary I did. But, I went from a very, it's a evangelical conservative tradition. And, the short version is I didn't think Gandhi should go to hell. So, just kind of had some rejigging of that and got out of that. And 20 years transition, I've been doing a lot of technology and business related stuff. And I'm a CX, or customer experience architect. But in the interim, I had just changes of my beliefs and faith and so forth. And during my journey, I ran into West Hill and Greta Vosper and the community there, and kind of found it was a place where I could, explore and rethink sort of how I was thinking about the world without some of the, the dogma that I didn't really kind of jive with. And so that was a bit of a breath of fresh air for me. And that's how I ended up at West Hill. And I think why I bring that up about the arts ministry, and in particular at West Hill, is that the West Hill congregation saw the arts outreach as a way to kind of broaden their scope, right? So obviously they've been talking to a lot of, United Church people. And for me as a former minister, I could have seen that, having a place like that would be accepting to me, or in my early days, having left the ministry, would have saved me probably about 20 years of pain in terms of figuring out my worldview and what's going on. So that would have been a really nice home. So for churched people, it was, doing that outreach got me excited, but then for the unchurched as well. My wife comes from an unchurched tradition, but shares a lot of my same values, does not get the United Church or West Hill or anything like that. But the arts is something that she does get. And so the arts then became, the vision for the arts outreach was to reach out to the broader community, to engage them in discussions. And that's what the founding of Thirdspace Community Arts was about. And we have founded a separate nonprofit corporation for Thirdspace Community Arts. And it's really based upon, the need to kind of bridge gaps between people, right? I think that we're seeing in this world, we're seeing a lot of accelerated change. We've got very profound changes happening in terms of, greater physical, informational, cultural mobility, and it's stressing our societies. So, we're seeing societies that were very close together and populations that were close now becoming more fragmented and pulled apart. We see more polarization. I don't have to tell you, if you turn on the news, you'll see we're becoming, on one hand, very much united societies are getting more polarized. And then on the other hand, we have kind of clash of cultures, right? Where folks are getting forced together by the greater mobility and flow of information. And that's causing us to come to a reckoning of how we're going to have a stable coexistence, right? And that really was what this conversation with Thirdspace were trying to do, that concept, third space, the word it's from is, comes from post-colonial thought, and this guy, Homi Bhabha, who talked about the third space as the place where culture is located, the place where identity is assimilated. And it's the place where we develop what he called a pact of interpretation. So like we're having this conversation, Carla, and it's like, um, I'm talking and I'm over here and you're over there, but our conversation exists somewhere between the two of us, and we have to understand or have an agreement as to what, a pact of interpretation is what I'm saying means in my context and your context, and we have an understanding, right? But so without that kind of shared context for us to interpret what we're talking about with each other, we're setting ourselves up for conflict. And that's what we're seeing, more and more in our society. And I kind of just, much like I was over the last, 20 plus years, unmoored. Our society is unmoored. And what we really kind of think in third space is that pact of interpretation, it's really something that can't happen on an intellectual or an ideological or dogmatic level, right? It's not something where I can have conservatives talking to liberals, and because that's just not a basis for us to start talking, right? We have to start to feel each other on a very basic level before we can start to understand what the words mean. As a matter of fact, like language itself, at the most basic levels, are things that has to do with how we feel about things. And so, what we see is that artists, I think, are ideally suited to help us kind of, it's what they do. They take culture apart, right? And they help us to reinterpret culture. So they're literally in the business of forming pacts of interpretation between people. And so that's the vision. The vision is that we will have artists in third space who are interacting with the community, and in particular looking for, places of challenge and places of difference, and interpreting that and reinterpreting that. So they're both interpreters of our culture and of each other, and mirrors for ourselves, so that we can understand, our identities. Because, even me as a Black Canadian guy who grew up in the suburbs, and who was, too Black for the suburbs and too white for downtown, and too conservative for this and too liberal for that. You have to kind of meet somewhere in the middle where you can start to understand your own identity and assimilate yourself. So it's about understanding each other and ourselves. And that's really what I think the artists are really ideally suited to do. And by doing that, I think that we can, from our different cultural silos, start to meet in the middle and have a new pact of understanding what art means and our communications mean, and when my story means, and how we are all connected. And I think that's one of the things I've really come to admire about West Hill, is the understanding of the interconnectedness of life, and how I think, as we kind of delve into art and how we feel about that, it really helps us to understand that. And yeah, so that's what we're trying to do. And one of the things that we've been doing most recently, so I've got a wonderful group with me over at Thirdspace. We've got some people from the West Hill congregation, and we've got Dwayne Morgan and Randall EDGEy, Tamla Matthews. They're all advisors on there. They're Scarborough artists. Dwayne Morgan's Scarborough Walk of Fame inductee, and Randell from Rise Edutainment. People will know of him quite a bit. So they're advising us. And they've been actually most recently working on something that we're going to be launching soon, which is the West Hill Legacy Project, where predominantly Black spoken word artists are interviewing folks from the West Hill congregation, and it's monolithically white for the most part, and interviewing them and telling their stories and reinterpreting that in spoken word, and then shooting that. We're going to be filming them telling their stories and doing kind of photographic profiles of them. And that will be part of the Toronto Year of Art, funded by the City of Toronto, and it's going to live at the Scarborough Town Centre for a period of time. And then Thirdspace is going to have an event over at West Hill. We're going to bring that, well, formerly the West Hill building. Now it's the East Scarborough Boys and Girls Club. And hopefully bring that there for an event there where we'll kind of celebrate that and take a look at what do those stories mean, reinterpret it again in that third space, right? By those two very different groups. So that's an exciting thing right now. We're planning some other projects with some artists as well that we're trying to get funded at this time. So I'm just really excited about the potential to
Yeah, I love.
bridge gaps.
And that's what I'm excited about when you're talking, is you're talking a lot about space, right? And so
Yeah.
even when you were talking about your own 20-year journey of, you're like, you need space and like to rethink, right? And so
Mhm.
I'm wondering, in all the spaces that have been created right now, has there been like another rethinking that's happening, or like any learnings that have come out of these spaces for yourself, or some of the advisories, or some of the artists, or for West Hill? Like, what are some of the rethinking that's happening from the space?
Well, it's a totally new kind of approach to ministry, right? I guess uh, there's not. So I mean, we're still discovering what it will be, right? How do we create that dialogue? So it's not just like a traditional, like an arts thing where I'm going to go and see something nice and go home. I really want to then have conversations about what does it mean. If I talk about, for example, somebody in the community who is an immigrant, what does that story mean? How do I then um, have that conversation with people who are on both sides of that equation? The person who's coming here as an immigrant, and maybe those folks on the other side who maybe are not as welcoming of that. I think they have to be involved in that as well. And how do we reach out to that? So we're still trying to think about how are we going to draw people in the community into these conversations. So that's a lot of learning for us. With a space, yeah, I mean, I hope I've answered a little bit, but yeah, we're still really trying to figure a lot of that out, and how we'll then not just have it be a one-way thing, but a conversation between us and the community. So that's going to be a lot of, again, the artists not telling their own stories, but reaching out to tell community stories. I think is really the thing that's going to draw those people into that new space there. We're going to be doing it not in the physical space only, by the way, but also right now, because we're COVID restricted, doing a lot of these things online. And actually just yesterday talking to Toronto artist Samantha Scott about an interesting VR or XR exhibit that she has planned, examining, the women in the Scarborough area and LGBTQ members of the community, and how can we tell their stories and how we affect them and how we're connected with them as well.
And I love that. I actually love that when you're like, did I answer that question? Because I think that like you're in this place of, you have to be open-minded, right? And like being
Yeah.
willing to pivot and change, because otherwise you're actually not listening to the stories and you're not listening, right? So I think
Yeah.
that's so critical.
Yeah, I mean, it's all R&D right now, really, right? You have to, and we do R&D together. I mean, if we're trying to figure out, how can we be useful to the community? That's a dialogue, right? It's not just I'm going to come with answers. There's going to be a dialogue between us, and see how we can catalyze something useful out of that. But yeah, we're really looking forward to the whole journey, and also looking forward to engaging with the rest of the United Church community about it too, because I mean, as in their conversations at the Innovation Cluster, I mean, I know that there's other United Churches who have identified like the arts as a really great way to have richer conversations with people. And I think it's just something that's so needed right now. All right. Like we're in I'm a marketer, right? Because as a technologist, I'm a marketer. So the product right now is belonging and purpose. Okay. And has there ever been a better time for belonging and purpose? But it's also at a time when the influence of what you would call church has been going down and down and down and down. So it's hard for me to invite somebody to church, but it's really easy for me to invite them to, a spoken word event about community issues or about their stories. And that provides us with a place where I don't know that we have this place in society outside of the kind of more like dogmatic structures, right? We're going to talk about what's meaning, and what's my place in life, and how do I respond to that? What's my obligations now that I understand I'm interconnected with you, you know? And how does my role as a man interact with yours, you know, your identity as a woman? Or how do we kind of interpret that? And how we affect each other? You know, whiteness and blackness is interconnected. So if we're going to assimilate that and have a pact of interpretation, we both have to talk, right? Otherwise, we're just having, well, conversations amongst ourselves, right? And that's not really driving anything progressive.
And guess what? Without those conversations, you don't have belonging nor purpose.
Exactly. And if you're having those conversations, you start to feel more and more like you belong. I mean, like for me, like I say, you know, I grew up in like Oakville in Mississauga, so I had the privilege of being, you know, like Black and kind of not so wealthy in a wealthy and monolithically white place, right? And then I'm over here and I come downtown and I love it, but you know, I got this accent and I'm not really exactly from the hood, right? Unless, you know, the West End's the hood or something. But so where do you feel like you belong, right? On what basis? You know, is it that you're a man, a real man? Is it that you're, you know, an Anglican, a real Anglican? I mean, like where do you really belong? And you have to find some new place. And I think, you know, as I've been thinking about Thirdspace, as we really realize is that none of us belong in any neat bucket, right? It's all of the intersections of all of those different identities that forms the individual and allows you to be yourself. So
The
that's what
real
I'm really
you.
about exploring, the real you. Yeah, we don't fit. You know, we're all strangers. We're all strangers. It's just, but we're strangers together, and we got to celebrate that difference and figure out how we overlap and affect each other and where we intersect. And I think that again, like it's hard to unpack that intellectually, but if I can have a conversation where like you and I cry about something or laugh about something before we start talking about what should we do about it, then we have a more fruitful conversation. And that's what, you know, artists are great at doing. They're much better than politicians and preachers at it, but you know, they're really great about making us feel something, and then we can say, you know, based upon how you're feeling, what do you think we should do about this?
So we're not talking about hockey, weather, or traffic.
Hey, well, you know, hockey, hey, listen, I grew up in Oakville playing lacrosse and hockey, so hockey makes me feel something too. We can have
That's fair. That's
we can
fair.
have I can have a very serious conversation about you, but how a young Black kid of 8 years old feels playing lacrosse and hockey in Oakville in the 70s, right? That's something to unpack as well, right? And, you know, that's, you know, perhaps some hockey dad listening to somebody tell a poem about how he felt might make him reinterpret how he wants to organize his hockey team, right? I'm not going to tell him what to do, but I want him to feel how I felt so that he can think about what they should do as a result. And that's really the point. Yeah, we can talk about mundane things. We can talk about beautiful things. We can talk about challenging things. I mean, art talks about all kinds of stuff. So
Yeah.
they won't all be heavy conversations. Some of them will be about, hockey. You know, what do you do about my uncle Don Cherry? You know, I kind of, I know. I did lawn sprinklers at Don's house when I was you know, in Mississauga as a young man. So, you know, he was one of my guys. You know, what do I do with that? Right? What do I do with you know, Archie Bunker? Archie Bunker, my good old Uncle Archie. You know, what do I do with that? And do I throw him out? Do I have a conversation with him and where he comes from, where I come from? How do we feel? You know, those are important conversations for us to have.
Yes. So the best part about everything that, like you're saying, you know, we're having conversations, so we're actively listening, we're actually hearing, we're feeling.
Yeah.
So what's next? Like, do you have an inkling of where the spirit's leading you at this point?
Well, it's leading us to experiment more, right? So the legacy project's going to be fun, with, you know, like, you know, 100-year-old, Jean from our congregation talking to some young Black spoken word artist about her journey, and what are they going to come up with to talk about? That's going to be fascinating. So we're going to explore that. We're going to explore some new media and reinterpreting art things with Amanda and her Eyeing Medusa exhibits. That's going to be interesting for us too. We're going to experiment, and we're going to listen to folks about what they're feeling and say, here's what we told about this story. How does that make you feel? And what is our response to that, knowing that all the places where we intersect? I just know that we have to try something different, right? Who knows what it is? I do know it's going to be fun. Right. I do know that. I do know because of the artists. I mean, if you ever heard Dwayne or Randell or any of these people, Rick Miller, who's engaged with us as well, perform and talk, it's going to be interesting. And I think that if we stay focused on people and their stories and how we're interconnected, it's going to affect some change, at least in the hearts of those people who are involved in that. Yeah.